All right, so welcome everybody to our Hangout on Air for day 3 of our Friend-A-Thon. I am Brandy Brooks, candidate for Montgomery County Council at Large, and it's a pleasure to be able to join you again for a third day of this event that we're doing to celebrate the end of the year, to be able to highlight the things that we've been doing in terms of reaching out to our community members across Montgomery County to talk about how they can participate in this campaign and this people-powered movement for democracy that we are building. Thank you for those of you who bore with us during the technical difficulties that we had a little bit today. But we're very excited to finally be able to have a few folks on air here and to have some conversation today about what it looks like to do that movement building and that organizing across the county. So we talked a bit in the last couple of days about the fact that Montgomery County is this huge, diverse county. It's diverse in geography. It's diverse in demographics like age, race, ethnicity, places where people come from around the world. It's diverse in terms of the range of incomes of folks who live here. And that diversity is one of our huge strengths. It's also can be a challenge for many communities to figure out how you build bridges and build community across those kinds of differences. And, you know, we know from human history that a lot of times those differences have been really challenging, but we also know that in the cases and places where folks have been able to build based on their shared interests in what they want their community to look like, that really powerful changes have been able to happen. And so we want to talk today about what that looks like for Montgomery County. And we've got a few folks who are here on the Hangout with us. And I'd love for folks to just kind of pipe up and introduce yourselves, say who you are.
All right, Brian Kreider, running for District 19 House of Delegates.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kenny Wilson, and I am Brandy's friend and fundraiser.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carol McSween Brooks. I am Brandy's treasurer and event and volunteer coordinator.
Hi, I'm Becky Arthur. I'm a supporter of Brandy Brooks and also her sister.
Awesome. So thanks to all of you for, again, joining us and for being willing to participate in this conversation. And I know we're looking forward to other folks being able to kind of jump on and off as they have time over the course of the next, 45 minutes to an hour or so. And, I guess one of the things I wanted to start with is that in our campaign, we have a particular interest in engaging groups of residents and voters who haven't necessarily always been connected to the political process and connected to getting involved in government. This can include young voters. This can include voters in communities of color, voters in immigrant communities, voters with low incomes, and kind of a wide variety of folks. And I'm curious if you work with or are familiar with any of those groups of folks or part of those groups of folks yourself. What kind of things do people say are the barriers to why it is that they don't get engaged in politics and government? What kind of keeps people away?
Please stop the smacking and get to the democracy.
So Kenny, I'm wondering if you would be willing to jump in a little bit and talk from your experience of living here in the county. What keeps some of the voters that who haven't been as engaged in politics and government away from doing so? And what do you see motivating the people that you do see engaged in politics?
Yeah, I am. Well, first of all, can you hear me? I want to make sure you can hear me.
Yep, we can
Yes.
definitely hear you.
Yeah, my couple things. One, being a part of several of those groups that we talked about. Actually, growing up, my family was low income. Growing up, Black, and even working in fields. Like I said, I did a lot of work in nonprofits. I worked a lot of community groups, youth and family services, things like that. And there were always a couple commonalities, especially in those groups. And the first one was that those groups feel like that their votes don't matter. It doesn't matter. They feel like their participation isn't going to mean anything. They don't see from our local government, and even as a broader range national government as well too. But and so even growing up, participating in general wasn't something that was promoted. It's not something that was really discussed. It was more passed off as, oh, someone will do it. It doesn't really matter. We have to focus more on working and trying to find jobs and trying to get money and dealing with direct needs of how can we afford our living and things like that. So for a lot of people in those groups, thinking about politics in general, just it's something that is seen as like unobtainable. We can't get there if we can't survive and make enough money to survive and support ourselves now. Something that's pushed later on. Later on, we'll get there when we can. We have to focus on right now. We're struggling now. What do we do now? And then, like I say, even working in community groups and something even at like what I call like the nonprofit level is that a lot of people don't feel that their voice is actually really heard. That their voice, their participation matters because they feel like it falls on deaf ears, or that no one really cares about them anyway. So I had a lot of conversations with people, especially in Montgomery County. And Montgomery County is still, and I talked about this yesterday, it's still very much divided. And so a lot of people don't feel like they're connected. They don't feel like they're engaged. They don't even know who local officials are. They don't know who their local leaders, their local politicians are. To even get engaged, they don't even know how to access and navigate the world to even engage in local politics. So there's such a disconnect. And so for people, they feel like they're disconnected. They're not heard. They can't, they have to, we're focused on now politics and local government and also local initiatives and things like that. They don't see it as beneficial.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. I think a lot of that are things that I've heard in doing organizing, and even sometimes in having conversations with different residents and voters, where they're just kind of like, "Yeah, I don't get involved in politics, or I've never been involved in politics," and people just sort of saying, "I don't know that it necessarily matters that much." I'm wondering, Brian. I know again you're campaigning in District 19, and also like I am out talking with a lot of different voters. When do you see that folks are struggling to understand how they connect to politics, or when you're interacting again with different groups of voters who might not have always been connected to the politics, what are they saying about why they haven't been engaged before?
I think it's mostly the way I look at it is that the politicians have failed to engage the people more so than the people have failed to engage the politicians. Even the people I run into who have engaged our politicians say they didn't get any response. They didn't get any results. So it sort of turned them off to it to begin with. 90% of them says they never even met their politician. They have no idea who's even in office. It's rare that you find somebody that actually knows who our current people are in office. And I think it's a failure of the politicians, but I also think the politicians do it that way so that they have the least amount of contact. It makes their lives easier. But there's no engagement. The politicians are never out there except for election year.
Yeah, I think that's huge. One of the things I remember doing a call with someone who ultimately became one of our supporters for the campaign, and I remember them being so surprised that they were getting a call from me, so surprised that someone had reached out to talk to them about what was going on in the county, what they were interested in a voter, as a voter, what we were looking to do with the campaign. And I see that surprise a lot in different ways when we go out canvassing. People are like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're actually coming to talk to me." And I can't believe that you're coming and asking me what I think. And it says something. It says something pretty unfortunate, actually, about the fact that our elected officials aren't really present. People don't know who they are. They don't know what their different layers of government even do, or how those different layers of government are structured. And in so many ways, like, it seems like the folks in power have been really content to let that situation stay, and to have that continue to be kind of the status quo, that we have pretty low participation of folks around our communities who really know what's going on in politics and are part of that process. And I think sometimes you even see elected officials get overwhelmed when a bunch of people do show up to participate in government, things like the Fight for 15 hearing, and they're like, whoa, a lot of folks are here. And it startles them, which is, again, I think says a lot about the way that we've all come to expect this system to work.
Yeah. And like I said, I think the engagement is the key thing. We need to find out who these people are and engage them. And that's what's going to drive the election or the progressive movement, I think, is to reach out to these people and actively engage them, actively bring them to the table versus waiting for them to come to the table or wait for them to realize, hey, I can actually make a difference. We need to engage them.
Yeah. So Brian, what's that looking like for you in District 19? How are you seeking to engage new folks, and what do you want that to look like if you were to be elected as a delegate?
So the way I'm doing it is kind of cheap, but it's the door knocking along with building an email list to try and at least get people engaged, let them know that, hey, people actually out there, they want to hear from you. They want to know what kind of issues are important to you, If you give them a direct line of contact and you also make sure you use it, and hopefully, people will come out and they'll participate. That's what I'm hoping, at least. I mean, how do you think we can engage thousands of people at the same time? Unless it's through email, mailers and stuff like that, but that's really a one-way communication in my mind.
Yeah, and this is I think a challenge that we're dealing with in the campaign, but also in general, thinking about how we govern is what does this look like? Because I think there's we can take advantage of mass communication, and that can really be beneficial. But there's also this other piece of how do we, do kind of that person-to-person word of mouth networks? Like, how do we activate the information about government, about politics, about things that are going on that passes not just kind of directly from me as a candidate or as an elected official out to people, but that also sort of passes and circulates through their network. So whether it's getting connected to folks who are within a civic association and making sure that information about different hearings, different issues, different opportunities to organize conversations is going out and connecting with those folks. I think one of the things that I saw that I thought was really great, again, looking at some of the Fight for 15 and other hearings that we've seen, where a lot of people showed up in support of that bill, is that you had not just progressive advocacy groups, but I remember there were groups of elders who wanted to make sure that their caretakers had adequate wages, and that they were making sure that the way that those folks got paid through Medicare was protected. So there were kind of all these little pockets of people who, through their networks and their personal connections with individuals who would be impacted, by the minimum wage came together and got the information out about, like, this is an important time for us to show up. And some of these folks, again, some of these elders, English was definitely not their first language, and it wasn't necessarily something that they were very fluent in, but they still knew and had communicated together about the fact that showing up in support of the folks who were providing them essential care was critical. And Carol, I'm wondering from your perspective as a, I know that we've talked about how, for you as an individual, you hadn't necessarily thought about being involved in politics, being someone who goes out and canvasses or who gets involved in a campaign. And why was that for you, and what changed?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I'm thinking of all the different perspectives that I've heard. Being involved in politics wasn't something that was exciting. It wasn't something that something that you did. Part of the responsibilities of it. I voted, but the thing that's been amazing about this campaign and now the community and doing the different types of outreach, as well as people in the scene, how the communities are alike. On on the responsibility of the officials, and it's being like you said, an older American, the young people out there, and to see is engaged. 15, you're absolutely right. We had many people there, and those of people living in Montgomery County and living so that the county could grow and thrive, and the services that we need. So it's a very important, but again, it's about in the community, engaging communities, excitement to make a change in your life.
Carol, I think we lost your sound a little bit, unfortunately.
You lost it during that whole thing while I was talking? Did anyone hear me? Raise your hand.
Okay, so all right, we're hearing you a little bit now, but I know the audio is coming out a little bit, in and out a little bit.
Not exactly sure why. Can you hear me now?
Yep, but go ahead. Keep talking. I just wanted to check in because there was a point where you popped out for a few seconds. So, but continue. I know you were saying sort of, not necessarily the things that you were used to, that was part of what you thought about how you participated beyond voting. And I think that was the part where you cut out.
Where I cut out. Are you hearing me now? I can go and say, are you here now? Just let me know.
Yep, go ahead.
Great. Exactly something that you did beyond voting. Campaign, the thing that makes it so different. We are indeed these different communities with different perspectives on an issue to make a difference in their life. And as an older adult, as a mature adult, as I like to call it, to be at the fight for 15 and see so many people, and also together because they weren't just interested $15 minimum wage, actually doing something and saying that pushing something through would make a difference in their lives, in the community to thrive and grow. It's really great. You hear that?
I heard that.
Yeah, I definitely did, and I think that's so great. Becky, since you chimed in there, what for you? Like, how have you been thinking about getting engaged in politics, and what that looks like for you? Even thinking about how, as you know, what we're doing with this campaign in Maryland, is that shifting the way that you're thinking about things as a Virginia resident, and what that starts to look like for you?
Yeah, so I live in Northern Virginia and Loudoun County, and we just recently, as many people know, had a pretty dynamic change in our delegates, and kind of radical change to help move, I think, our state in a little bit different direction to help all of our communities across the board. And one of the things I've noticed by being a part of the campaign and just noticing the movement over the past, if you want to say year and a half, is a lot of times we get really busy in what we're doing day to day. I mean, I'm a parent, 2 boys. I'm also going to school. I work full time. So trying to reach me at different points to on a topic that interests me sometimes is difficult. But I realize, like, to the point of being engaged from your different elected officials, but also engaging in what's happening is very important, because the things that our local government, our state government do, and obviously our federal government, impact our daily lives. So, I'm sure a lot of people have heard about the tolls on 66. I'm lucky I don't have to drive that way for the toll portion inside the Beltway, but that's a big issue for a lot of commuters in my area, because there isn't really public transportation out here. I know they're working on it. The closest, the toll road that does come out this way is rather expensive, and they hadn't widened a lot of the roads. So traffic is one of the big issues in this area. So what we found is, like, a lot of candidates have reached out to voters to kind of get them to understand that, yeah, the decisions that we make impact you on a daily life and what you're doing. And if you don't voice that, hey, you know what, there is a problem here, there's a light that needs to go here because there's accidents that are happening, or people are driving too fast, or hey, the road needs to be widened because we've added all these developments, but in the development, the construction budgets and agreements that went forward with the developers, it wasn't planned for any widening of the roads. And those are the kind of things that when you don't realize that, unless you get engaged and make sure that you have a voice and someone's thinking about the things that are going to impact you as a individual resident and collectively as your neighbors, it helps to make sure that those issues are being taken care of. And there's a lot of common ground for people across the board. I mean, I don't think there's anybody in the Washington, D.C. area that doesn't deal with traffic one way or another. So whether it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, helping to resolve traffic issues is very helpful. And then also making sure, like, some of the issues are very regional to different places, obviously, but you can't ignore certain issues, like having social economic justice out here in Loudoun County is just as important as it is as you get closer to DC. But it's not one of the higher issues, but it helps if you in your community can help your elected officials understand how those issues impact you as an individual in the area where you live. So I'm really excited to help support Brandy in her campaign and learn from the things that she's doing, so that when I go to engage my elected officials, I can speak to them about certain issues that I do think are important to me across the board, and how we can make things better for our community.
Yeah, and Becky, I think you make such a great point about the need to educate elected officials about what's going on, and the need for elected officials to continue to educate themselves about what's going on in our communities. And again, I think we've developed sort of some of these ideas about what it means to be an elected official or who's an elected official. And it's like, you have to be a person who sort of knows everything and does everything or something. It's like a weird thing where we think that we sort of receive pronouncements or information from on high from them. But again, as someone running for office, I and who knows a lot of other people who are running for office, I can say very clearly that elected officials are just people. And we have expertise in some areas. We have a lot of things that we don't know. And that continuous process of saying this has to be a dialogue, this has to be a shared, ongoing learning experience where we all participate with each other and come to understand what needs to happen in our county, and the recognition that the best elected official in the world just doesn't have all the information because they're a single human person, and that it takes all of us to be able to engage in, to be able to really meaningfully participate in discussions and in decision making around our policies and around our government in order for us to get to really good solutions, because no one person could possibly do that. And I think, again, that's kind of a shift that we need to start making in our politics. And hopefully as more folks see more and more people running, that understanding that, elected officials don't breathe any particularly rarefied air, and, we put our pants on one leg at a time. So, and Michelle, you've been working in democracy and sort of voting and thinking about how people get engaged and how you get fair representation in our elections over the past few years. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, what does that look like in terms of making sure that people feel that their voice matters?
Yeah. So, hi, everyone. This is Michelle Whitaker. I'm the campaign manager and communications director for Brandy Brooks. And it's great to have everybody on so we can have this wonderful discussion as part of our Friend-A-Thon ongoing discussion here and engagement with folks. We're going on video. Hey, there we go. Hi, I'm there. So one of the things that's really, when we're talking about civic engagement and participation, I mean, it really does start on the local level, and it really is about how do we hold our leaders accountable on one hand, but also have a working relationship so that they understand what's happening in the community. So it's not just saying like we're putting the feet to the fire of elected officials, but saying like if this is a partnership, if we want a representative government, then it requires participation from everyday people as much as we want our elected officials to go out there and advocate for the policies that are going to help us as parents of young children, as workers who want to make sure that we have equal pay for equal work in our workplaces, and respect and safety in the workplace. For everybody who wants to make sure that they have a working and safe public transportation system. All of these things matter. And so being able to do that effectively is all about us being able to have a great system. So, I mean, those are the important things that we need to keep in mind as we're thinking about civic participation. So that's my thought right there.
Yeah, and I'm curious for folks. I know that one of the barriers that we often don't talk about are kind of the disparities and the divisions that people experience when it comes to race and ethnicity. And this is absolutely true here in Montgomery County, as well as in other places across the country. But it's something that I think we have a hard time really figuring out how to talk about and acknowledge. So particularly for folks who are living here in Montgomery County, what do you think we need to be doing to bridge, the race and the class divides that we are seeing here in the county overall, and that we certainly see replicated in the progressive movement and the way that the progressive movement looks? Any takers on that big question?
No, I think it makes sense. This is Kenny again. I think a couple things. One is about upfront honest that we do have such a divide, racially, socioeconomically, and being honest about that, saying, okay, we know it's here to do about it. And then I think, like Brian said earlier, it's local politicians reaching out to these groups, reaching out to people. For one of the things we never experienced because we didn't know who was there. We didn't know what was going on. To reach out and also to let people know who we are, this is what we can do, this is what we're trying to do. Take forth real effort if we're bringing people together to facilitate those meetings or gatherings or whatever it is, how we get people together, being able to open up dialogue, have a space where people can have open, honest conversation. I think one of the things is that people don't feel like, so, also there's a lot of distrust there as well too. So being able to have people say, you know what, this is an open space. We need you to say what you need to say, let people know what's going on, so that way we can help and how we can begin to do something about it. And then staying in contact with people, network and communicate with each other, I think is a big thing. If there's such a divide, then how can we begin to narrow those divides? We have to start bringing the people together. People who would never have an opportunity to even meet or have a conversation with each other, let alone work together issues. So I think it's a great opportunity for our local leaders to begin to those efforts to begin to bring the people together, to begin to have those conversations with the people. And I do believe, that once the people in Montgomery County, that the local leaders, the local politicians begin to, they feel like they care about them. And I think if they do feel that, hey, these people do care about us, they're trying to help, I do believe we'll see the connections built. We'll see the relationships being built. We'll see people begin to come together, people speaking out. I think it's already started to happen in certain cases here. I mean, people are beginning to speak up. I think people are beginning to understand that their voice is heard, but I think we need to go deeper and deeper and deeper and to really begin to build those connections and relationships.
So you able to hear me? This is Carol.
Sorry, Carol, were you jumping in there?
Yes, I wanted to make a comment. Is that possible? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I just wanted to note that Kenny brought up some really good points, as well as what I heard from you, Brandy. There's this hesitation because, as I mentioned, going back to the fact that involvement, even in local politics, was really just voting for national things. And one of the great things I've found since moving to Montgomery County is seeing where different policies and, like development, how it really does have an effect. We talk about traffic and housing. It really is something you can see as you go out there and do things, daily. And then so you think, how can I make a difference? And you get involved with a campaign. I get involved with a campaign like this, where people are talking about how we can make a difference, and you can shift the paradigm. Well, maybe I can. Hesitation, because you really worked before. And I think Kenny was really right in what he said about how you have to connect and keep communicating, because you have to build. It's building a movement, which is built on trust, which is built on, it's built on trust. And as you see people listening to you, and I do mean see people like Brandy, when we are at our meet and greets and the questions come up, the real questions about everyday things, and the answers are given in terms of how we can affect this, then you say, well, wow, I can make a difference. And you continue the dialogue and you continue talking. So as a minority, minorities have not felt that there is this power in their hands. And they may not even know how it's supposed to look and talk. we can make it look like what we need it to be. Power behind this people-powered campaign. The trust that will be built in the movement and the fact the participation will go on in the lives of everyone who does this now, because they're going to be looking to see the difference.
Yeah, Brian, I'm curious if you're still on and listening here. What, from your perspective, does racial justice come up as an issue when you're campaigning or when you're thinking about who's engaged in your district?
So weirdly enough, racial justice does not come up much in my district. What I find is interesting is that no matter what color, creed, or religion's background people have, their concerns are all the same, and they don't even realize it. You know, everybody in this area talks about universal health care or the cost of prescription medications, or it's all the same stuff, and people don't even realize that they all agree on the same thing, I think. And it's like nobody's reached out to them and said, hey, you all agree on this. Let's get a petition going. Let's get, signatures. Let's really show to our politicians, these things matter to us. And that's one of the things I think is kind of missing is there's nobody regularly engaging anybody saying, hey, these are all your concerns. It's pretty much universal across the board. And it's just nobody's engaging them. Nobody's showing them that, this is universal. So we need to show these things. I talk about how most of these people have never met their politicians. They've never been engaged by them. And that means that politicians don't realize how big of a concern it is for everybody on these issues.
And Brian, I mean, what do you think it is that, given that community members share so many of the same concerns across these different racial or economic lines, I mean, what do you think keeps people from recognizing that they have something in common, and perhaps many things in common with someone who they don't identify with otherwise socioeconomically?
Honestly, I want to say busy lives and lack of engagement by other people. People are going to go off into their own worlds and do their own things unless somebody comes out and engages them.
And do you find that you've had success in being able to bring folks from different backgrounds together to say, hey, actually, we have these common interests and we want to be working together to figure out how we make our government more responsive?
I haven't truly tried to organize or motivate them, I'm not going to lie, and like a petition drive or anything like that. It's mainly showing them, hey, you guys all have these same things in common with me, and I'm going to support you guys, and, not going to lie.
No, I mean, I definitely think it's something that, a lot of us as folks who are working on campaigns, figuring out how we engage and do this work of actually being able to weave our community together and to address some of these different regional divisions, and to address some of these other divisions in our community, because I think this is, Kenny alluded to this a bit, this is a big source of, I think, some of the inequity that we're seeing across different parts of the county, and the feeling of not being well served. It's interesting. You hear that in a lot of different places across the county from a lot of different people. And, I really think that question of how we as public leaders, whether we're the ones running for office or just folks who are, working to build kind of stronger political engagement in our communities, how we become a bridge builders and people who open up pathways of communication that haven't really been open before, and where folks haven't really thought that they could be building relationships. And how do we be intentional about doing that, and about saying we are going to bring communities together, open up those conversations where you can actually start to build some trust and some shared understanding in a very different way. Because I think without that, it just doesn't function as well as it could, and I think we all miss out when that happens.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share, like today, an important part of the work that we do on a campaign is canvassing. That's how we reach out to people and engage with new folks. That's how we help to hear from people in the community and talk about what is their core issues.
Mm-hmm.
So Brandy, talk a little bit about some of the conversations that we had today.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was really great. We did a little bit of canvassing in our area here in Wheaton before we came over here to start the live stream. And it was, it was a great day for going out and canvassing. I think the cold was keeping a lot of folks at home, so they were there and available to talk to us when we went out on the doors. And that was really a lot of fun. And it's interesting, I think each one of the folks that we talked to had a little bit of a different perspective on things that they were looking at. Some were kind of asking about development in our area. Other folks were focused on education. Other folks were focused on, like, how do we find ways to support families and children so that parents actually have the economic resources to be more present for different things that are going on in their children's lives and their children's education. But I think, one of the things that was really clear for me is that the themes that we hear people talking about across the county, as Brian said, are very, very similar. It's about, again, it's about transportation, it's about housing, it's about education, and it's about the economy, and people are talking about these four things over and over and over again. I think I do hear, some stuff that's a little bit different from different members of our community in terms of how well they're served by these systems to begin with. I think education is one of the clearest places where I see some of this difference in perspective from different groups of folks. I've had conversations with a number of different parents of color talking about the experience of their children, both when it comes to the quality of the learning environment they're in, like whether or not their buildings are even being maintained, things like that, but also when it comes to how often their children get targeted for things like school discipline and how that impacts their kids' education and their kids' understanding of what the opportunities are that can really be available to them. And I think it's critical that as we're talking about these issues, that we sort of talk about our broad goal that we want to make sure that every child in Montgomery County has access to a really good education, but that we also talk about, that we dig into some of those details of, well, what are the things that are going on that are different for different folks when it comes to that? One of our the people that we talked to was talking about the different ways that parent-teacher associations are funded, depending on whether a community is more or less affluent, and how that changes the kind of things that are available to young people in the school system, not because they are, better or worse learners, but just because they don't have access to some of those same financial resources. And so when we talk about what it looks like to come up with a really strong education system for all of our students in Montgomery County, I think it still remains important for us to acknowledge where some of these differences are coming from and say, okay, then that's going to mean that we are going to need to be putting extra support, or that we're going to need to putting extra resources or finding different structures that really ensure that students and families who are not receiving the full benefits of Montgomery County's highly rated education system actually get that. And, you know, it's interesting too, like having conversations with people, even about the way that we think about different schools in Montgomery County. And I remember this coming up in a conversation at one of our house parties, where someone was talking about this very notion of like good schools and bad schools, and how school rating processes work.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, something that a lot of folks don't know is that, you know, in the way that these schools are rated, they often simply, like, the presence of a high proportion of students of color, or the presence of a high proportion of students who get free and reduced meals, automatically lowers the rating of a school. And, you know, that doesn't have anything to do with the test scores that those students make. That doesn't have anything to do, again, with the quality of the teachers there, or the type of, you know, the quality of the community. It's simply saying that if you have low income students, or if you have students of color, we're going to automatically rate your school as a worse school. And I think we need to talk about how some of those notions are embedded into the way that we think about policy.
Yeah.
I remember being at a gubernatorial candidates forum a couple of weeks ago, and hearing someone say, you know, there are more than, 130, 140 languages spoken in Montgomery County public schools. And to talk about that as an asset, as a strength of our school system, as opposed to a challenge that we have to deal with and figure out how to, you know, do something different about. And again, that's not usually a perspective that we bring to thinking about how is the diversity of our school population a strength and an asset that that we want to celebrate, and that we want to make sure can fully flourish, not necessarily something that is that causes problems or that lowers the quality of our educational system.
Right. I mean, it's a really good point. And as you see with this picture, that was us out. You out there knocking on doors, and I was taking some pictures of you doing this, and we were talking about the issues, hearing from folks about the issues, but we're also reminding people about the Public Election Fund, which was new for a lot of people, hearing it for the first time. And, you know, several people were excited about, like, the potential of giving $25 and that being matched and becoming $125 to the campaign. And so, you know, that's an exciting part. And I just want to remind folks, those who are on the call with us, but also those who are watching this and will be watching this in the future, that if you want to donate to Brandy's campaign, you can donate at brandyformontgomery.com/donate. And you can click on the big blue button. If you go to the /donate, you go directly to the donate pages. You can send a check, or you can click on the donate buttons, and you can do an electronic donation to us. And that's the way that you can help support candidates. The Public Election Fund really helps create the opportunity for more diverse candidates to run. Folks like Brandy, more women, more people of color, more candidates who are from the community, who really want to bring a voice, new voices, new ideas about the issues that matter most in our communities. So this is an exciting program and an opportunity. And then, you know, we're really excited about what this has, the opportunity it has for residents in terms of having a stronger voice, as opposed to developers and you know, big money and corporations. And I know, Brian, if you're still on the line, for you, you know, I've talked to many delegates who are running in the race who've also expressed, like, while this isn't something that exists for delegates who are running at the state level, this is something that we can, at Montgomery County, can model and show that this is a program that works, can help to be a model for the rest of the state. We know several other counties are looking at this for local county offices. Brian, are there some thoughts that you have about, you know, how could a public election, fair election system work for races, for even your race, and for how you engage with folks as you're you know, campaigning?
So I think that having a public financing option for the state delegates would be phenomenal. I think I've heard the Annapolis called the most corrupt legislature in the nation. But one of the things I think would be more of a challenge is just the sheer number of candidates that there are at the state level would be the biggest hurdle for that to come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question, and I know one of the ways, at least, that Montgomery County has chosen to kind of manage, do some demand management on the public election fund, is by having the fundraising thresholds that they have in terms of number of donors who need to participate and amount of money that you need to raise in order to qualify for the matching. Obviously, that's one of the reasons that we're actually doing the Friend-A-Thon, is because we want to reach that qualifying threshold so that we can begin to take advantage of the fund. But I think that would be an interesting question in terms of the mechanics of how something like that would work at the state level. How do you do that? How do you set those thresholds at the right place where people have to definitely demonstrate like viability and community support, but where it also doesn't just become another kind of barrier that only privileges folks who already would have fairly easy access to fundraising. But I do, I've heard a lot of delegate candidates in conversations say, we would really love to figure out how you support this kind of system at the state level. And there are definitely both large cities and states that have programs like this, that really support public financing for candidates. And one of the reasons that we like talking with folks about the public election fund is, again, it starts to change the perspective of how people think of themselves and how people think of their engagement in politics. I think, both Kenny and Carol mentioned the idea of like thinking of engagement in politics as just voting every couple of years, but not sort of really being involved in the meantime. Most folks, until fairly recently, didn't necessarily think of themselves as political donors either, and weren't being approached as political donors and saying, like, you actually are a valuable campaign donor and someone who we want to engage. That's not an identity that I think most of us have been approached with until we've seen things more recently, in the last 8 to 10 years about people, in the presidential races, folks starting to do fundraising differently, and then that beginning to change the mindset about how our state and local races can also work. And it's another way that we start to say, hey, your engagement in politics and your ability, your voice in shaping what happens, what kind of candidates we get, what kind of conversations those candidates will have, that all of this you can influence this in a very, very different way.
Yep.
And I think that's so important, in part because I think one of the things that's always frustrated me as a voter, in looking at the elections that I've been a part of, is thinking that, I'm always faced with the lesser of two evils choice in a lot of cases when I go to vote. And this particularly happens at the national level, and just wishing that there were a way that I could get better candidates, that I could get better choices.
I think that you bring that up, and I think the public election fund is one way that it helps to encourage more folks to run for office, and we definitely need a system that helps to break that barrier in terms of the money barrier, that helps that creates a level playing field in terms of people being able to raise money and to compete for that. But also being able, when there are more candidates running, I think there's also a really important thing that we should talk about, and maybe have a whole other session about our structures of voting, because I think one thing that goes around well with this is if we have more candidates, and we need to be able to have a robust way of showing making choices about those candidates, then we need to look at the way we vote and have systems that actually allow for our choices to be reflected in that vote. And that's where systems like ranked choice voting and fair representation voting really apply, and are the possibilities that help us to have a more reflective vote in our actual government. And that's where I encourage folks to check out fairvote.org and Representation 2020 to learn more about fair voting structure systems and how those can work, and how that actually makes a difference in our electoral process. So along with creating public election systems and breaking that barrier in terms of money, we need to also look at our structural systems. We need to look at redistricting. I think we could have a whole session on that and talk about all of the structural pieces we need to do to our elections.
Right, and I think maybe we should. I know there are a couple of folks who wanted to jump in with things. I think, Carol, you were one of the folks who wanted to chime in?
Yes, I did. I wanted to echo. Must be mine. I wanted to say that the public election fund, being a treasurer and modeling it here in Montgomery County, has two very important aspects to looking at it on a state level or a larger level. And one of those things is that, you know, we do have a group in place that's monitoring, as Brandy said, the amounts that can be given. We have campaign managers who are looking at how we need that would be distributed across the county voters. But the thing is, as we work out the kinks, then this is going to be something that is statewide and then nationally something that people are going to look at. I know when I mentioned donating to the campaign, many people will say no right off the bat. I don't have that kind of money. And then when we mentioned that, you know, $5 would make a big difference for us, you should see the excitement that goes, as Brandy said, that when they realize that they actually can participate at that level in an election for an elected official that will work for them. So there's this leveling the playing field. There's this bringing in the engagement from just, you know, everyday citizens. And then there's the working out of the system so that it doesn't become something that can be a hindrance, a big hindrance to either side, but is something that does grow the political democracy. And I was really interested in the comment that Brian made about how racial justice isn't a big issue in his area, in his campaign. And that's an interesting perspective to hear that. As he said, the interests among all the people are the same. But I would note, and this is something that the Public Election Fund and you know, People Powered campaign going out into the communities that are underserved really highlights, that you may not know that racial justice is really a big issue in your area. The concerns are the same, but the perspective on addressing those and really getting involved in making the change is what is the difference. If you don't feel you can trust, if there is not that history of engagement that shows that it makes a difference, then it may not seem like it's part of the campaign spectrum, but it actually is, because the people in those areas are often seen as non-voters. You know, they don't really share the interest when it really is there for a whole different reason. So I think the Public Election Fund, as it works out, and as we note what is, excuse me, different, what needs to be changed, what's kind of a challenge, what doesn't seem to be working, and really, all those things are going to come out, when we finish this election cycle. As we work that out, it is something that I think many, many, many areas will adopt, and eventually it'll become a basis for a larger model.
Yeah. So thank you. So the sun is starting to set here in our studio, and we're going to bring this our chat to a close. I want to thank everybody for joining us for the chat and working through our technical issues at the beginning. I appreciate everybody. We're really excited about using this and doing some future chats. And you know, this is a great opportunity for us to work out everything. Hi. So this is great. And to just close out, this is part of our Friend-A-Thon 2017. Woo-hoo! And so as part of that, our last event tomorrow, we're going to be at Mr. Smoothie in Rockville from 2 to 4. And we're going to be broadcasting live. We're going to have folks who are going to be there. We're going to be enjoying some bubble tea and some smoothie shakes and other stuff. And we're going to be talking to folks who come in and from Rockville and supporters. And it's just an opportunity for us, again, have these conversations about the issues that are impacting our communities and how we can come together to work for a future, a Montgomery for all that really it lifts up those issues and moves us all forward. And so we're excited to have that conversation. If you're available to join us, again, it's Mr. Smoothie in Rockville from 2 to 4 tomorrow. And you can join us online or you can join us in person if you're there. And so we're excited about that. But then also, we encourage folks, if they can make a donation, you can go to brandyformontgomery.com, click on that big blue button that says donate, make a donation today, help power our movement, help to advance the issues, advocate for the issues that matter most, elect folks who are going to be your advocate and work with you and be part of the process of creating a reflective democracy. And that's what Brandy is all about. And we're excited to support Brandy. So close us out.
All right. Well, again, thank you all. Thank you for being a part of the different ways that we are seeking to engage our community, to open up spaces for some of these different conversations about the things that matter. Thank you for showing your support by showing up here. Thank you for those of you who have donated already for showing your support as donors. And if you haven't donated yet, we encourage you to do so. This is day 3 of our Friend-A-Thon. Tomorrow will be our final day, and we are definitely excited to have new folks come and participate in some of these new and exciting ways that we are able to engage as residents of Montgomery County in shaping our political process and in shaping the government that we get. A shout out again, thanks to Brian Kreider and all the other folks across Montgomery County who are stepping up to run for office this year, and who hopefully you'll be seeing across the county in the coming months, engaging people from all areas of our county to talk about how we build the best communities and the best democracy that we can have for our county. So thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks, London. London's giving a wave goodbye. So a wave goodbye to London as well. And we look forward to catching you all at Mr. Smoothie tomorrow in Rockville from 2 to 4 p.m. Take care, everybody.
Woo-hoo. Bye.
Bye.